Episode 4. Ignited. Her arms were cramping. Where she had hooked her legs around an iron strut, the skin chafed and every movement burned. She shifted her grip again and again, swapped arms, tried to spare whichever one hurt most. A quick glance at her chrono told her that almost half an hour had passed since the explosion in Car 4 and the uncoupling of the last 3. The half-shredded fourth car had held against the forces of the ride for a few more minutes, and then, probably from the engine cab, had been cut loose, derailed, and gone down somewhere in the endless deeps of the low reach. After that, the ride had been uneventful. But now, after more than half an hour, her arms were beginning to fail. She prayed that wherever this transport was going, it would slow down gently so she could drop off and start the long way back. Her wish was granted. The train slowed. Piece by piece, it shed its speed, and after a few minutes, the whole infrastructure around and beneath Hope changed. The dull, blue-grey light of the low reach vanished, and darkness took its place. It had gone completely black. They must be in some kind of tunnel, Hope thought. Then the train slowed further, and her surroundings grew lighter bit by bit. The train came to a stop, and Hope let herself sag with an inward groan of relief. It was like deliverance. A dull hiss and a click told her the engine had been shut down and the car's circuit cut. She had reached the end of the line. She rolled out sideways and crawled under another car on the parallel track. She heard shouts and calls, wild commotion. Hope decided she was best off getting away from here as fast as she could. She crawled under car after car, across and away from the train she'd arrived on. When it grew quieter around her, she looked about to get her bearings. Vast halls in the distance, and beside them silos stacked like little jars. But it was something else that drew her eye. The ceiling. She was in a cavern. And unless she was mistaken, and this was the only logical explanation, these were the burrows. That was not good, she thought. Damn it. She had to orient herself. Hope darted between small hubs and half-open loading hangars until she spotted a taller hall. At the rear of the building, she found a service ladder and climbed it. An overview would do her bearings good, because she had no idea at all where she was. Her resolve dimmed when she reached the roof and crawled on her belly to the edge. The view took her breath away. It was an enormous factory and loading complex, with silos, loading ramps, more than 14 rail lines, and a kind of refinery. All of it underground. She followed the tracks as they wound, switch by switch, into a single line and vanished into a tunnel. The tunnel was sealed by a huge armored gate. Her heart raced. She quickly traced the wall around the complex, and her foreboding was confirmed. She was sealed in, inside a secret, unknown factory complex in the burrows. Her breathing went heavy. Focus, she whispered to herself. She steadied her breath, and after 3 or 4 calm, controlled, deep breaths, she exhaled, opened her eyes, and set off. She would not die down here. The same way she had come, she climbed back down and made for the tracks. She would simply leave on the next train, exactly the way she'd arrived. Half as bad as it looked. As she crawled back under one of the tracks, a foul smell caught her nose. She had ignored it completely before, when she'd been fleeing in a panic. But now, as she searched her surroundings with focus and noticed everything, she caught it. In the distance, on this track, somewhere near the great refinery, she heard sounds and voices. She peered over the platform and watched a loading machine scoop something off the cars with a shovel. Then she understood. Her eyes went wide. As the next loading machine took up a load and followed the one before it, something fell from the shovel. Two men in masks and full work gear grabbed it and heaved it onto a smaller transporter standing nearby. A body.
In disbelief, Hope followed the row of cars the workers were unloading, all the way back to the last car near her. She rolled to the other side, put the loading ramp and the car between herself and them, and climbed up. Her breath quickened. She braced herself for what she would see, and it didn't help. She looked into the car and saw them. Bodies. Hundreds. Thousands. The stench stabbed at her nose, as if, with the realization, the smell itself had turned more vile. Her hands gave way. She climbed, half fell from the car, and stumbled back a few steps. The shock went to the marrow. She leaned against the car behind her and moved slowly down the row. She counted the cars, and with the number, the image of the unloading, and the knowledge of where they were, horror overcame her.
Stars. Heavens, no.
She breathed.
No, no, no.
She stammered. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she fought them down. Her breathing grew labored. She thought of the number of cars she had seen from up on the factory, across all those lines. Reality hit her like a hammer blow. If every one of those cars was full of bodies, then it had to be tens, no, hundreds of thousands. All at once, a feeling gripped Hope, that something was deeply, completely wrong. Not because of the fact that she'd stumbled on shipment after shipment of the dead. It was the realization that she had walked into something that made her small world, with all its worries, fade to nothing. She rolled back to the loading side and peered out. Her gaze followed the loading machines. The refinery. She crept forward. Curiosity drove her on. Without any real reason, more on instinct, she crept up to the refinery, waited until no one was in sight, and ran across the open ground to a cluster of containers against its side wall. The stench was even more bestial here. A mix of ozone and metal, laced with sulfur. She pulled her mask tighter over her face. A service stair ran up the side wall. She climbed it and slipped through a door into the interior of the refinery. Inside, she crept along the railing. When she found safe cover behind one of the huge columns, she took in the refinery from within. It was a complex chemical plant, a blast furnace, and countless pipes. She had no idea what any of it was, but she didn't need a complex understanding of it. When one of the loading machines drove into the refinery and tipped a load of bodies onto a conveyor belt, she understood. This was where the dead were disposed of. On the far side, up on the refinery railing, she spotted another service door, just like the one she'd come through. Hope decided it was an elegant way to cross the vast, guarded floor. She hurried, crouched along the upper railing toward the other door. The refinery was enormous. She had already run at least 300 meters and was thinking, just before she reached the door, why anyone would build a crematorium this size. When something caught her eye. She stopped and stared down, dumbfounded. Her gaze went back to the conveyor belts of bodies, and then to the belt beneath her. They were rations. The very rations they had meant to steal. The exact rations she stole every day, day after day, from the distribution points in the low reach. Juice, in the common tongue. The grey nutrient paste the Empire handed out as the staple food. Her eyes went wide. Her stomach turned as the realization struck her like a blow. She clapped a hand over her mouth and tried to breathe the reflex away, but she couldn't. She threw up behind one of the massive support pillars. The facade of her strength crumbled. The scale of the cruelty was too much. She shook her head, dumbstruck, and thought of Marie and herself, eating the juice triumphantly,
day after day. Every day they survived had been a small victory. But the price was simply... She shook her head. What kind of monster did this? The answer was obvious. She had never had much use for politics, but the way the Emperor treated her and all the rest, the carelessness with which human life was handled here, only confirmed one thing. She didn't need him. The opposite. She thought of her sister, and a deep, boundless rage rose in her. Hope looked down at the crates full of juice beneath her. "You'll pay for this," she swore, whispering. And with that, she left the refinery.
It took almost 20 minutes to work her way between containers and silos to one of the tracks, where a maglev engine was being shunted, apparently toward the exit. She assumed that was her ticket out. If a train was leaving from here, it was probably that one. On an open loading area, 4 enormous steel structures stood lashed together, sending and signal antennas crowning their tops, waiting. They were being loaded onto the very train she'd marked. Good, she thought, so it's leaving soon. She slipped between 2 more containers toward the track where she'd seen the train. Hope hurried through the container maze, set on getting her fare in time and being under the train when it pulled out. Her thoughts were already wandering around a way to hook herself onto something under the car for longer, when she rounded a corner and ran straight into a guard. Both of them fell flat on their backs. Hope stared at the guard, who, like her, needed a moment to grasp what had just happened. Hope didn't hesitate. She threw herself onto the guard, who was already reaching for his weapon. They grappled, rolling on the ground. Hope tried to get control of the gun. The guard got himself up to his knees and, with better leverage, landed a hook on her. She fell to the side and rolled as best she could. The guard righted the weapon, twisted around in the struggle, shouldered it, and went to fire. Hope grabbed for her knife and threw it. The knife buried itself in the guard's eye. He held still for a second, then fell backward to the ground and loosed a shot as he went down. Hope's eyes went wide. It took less than 10 seconds for the alarm to sound. She snatched up the guard's rifle and her knife and ran. It was less than a minute before the first shot whipped past her ears. She took cover behind a metal crate. "She's at the back, by the KRX crates!" she heard a guard shout. "Cut her off!" she heard another. Her heart pounded. She ran. "There!" she heard a shout. A shot flew over her head. "Stop shooting wild, you idiot!" she heard a guard yell. Hope peered over one of the metal crates and saw the guard. She raised the guard's laser carbine and fired. Then she ran behind the next crate and fired again. On the third time, one of her shots hit a silo behind the guards, and it caught fire. She lined up to fire and saw the horrified face of a guard staring at the silos in alarm. Hope looked through her sight at the silos. "Ah," she whispered, when she read the label that sounded to her like a free pass. Methanol chloride. She gave a slight grin as she understood why the guard looked so terrified. "Eat this," she said, and fired on the silo. "No!" she heard in the distance. The explosion hurled the crate Hope had thought herself safe behind backward, and she struck hard against a concrete strut behind her. The cavern was flooded with orange-yellow light. Hope blinked, and as the silos caught fire, one after another in a chain reaction, she wondered for a moment whether it had been a clever decision. Another explosion, and another. The silos went up in flames, one after the next. Hope picked herself up and saw the refinery she had crept through earlier catch fire at the roof. The guards ran in panic toward the refinery. A few men tried to beat the inferno back with small extinguishers, but Hope could see it was a lost cause. Satisfied, she watched the fire devour the refinery. The inferno spread further, and the alarm grew louder. In the distance, she saw the huge armored gate opening. She ran. No guards, no one to worry about. They were all busy fighting the fire. 5 minutes later, she had run through the armored gate. The fire in the cavern behind her lit the tunnel well enough. She ran as fast as she could. Behind her, she heard an enormous explosion. The sound shot through the tunnel. The refinery, she thought, and grinned. She ran on. Justice, she told herself. A scrap of justice.